$120 million mansions built on the beach I called home for 30 years were wiped out in a single night. Not by a storm, not by any disaster. The ocean took them back. And the craziest part, I didn't feel sorry for them. In fact, I couldn't stop smiling. How could this happen? How could luxury homes just vanish overnight? Stick with me, and I'll tell you how the ocean reclaimed what was always its. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, hit like, share, and subscribe to QA Stories for more. I'm James, 35 years old, and I was sitting on my porch drinking morning coffee when the mailman brought me a thick envelope that would change everything. Inside was a notice from the HOA Seashore Estates that read, "Violation Notice Number 1. You have 30 days to comply or face legal action." I read it, each word making my heart race with fury. How dare they threaten me after everything I'd invested in this land? I mean, seriously, did they really think they could just show up and start bossing me around like I was some new tenant? That letter felt like a declaration of war, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time I'd be reading one. The formal letterhead meant nothing to me, but the underlying message was crystal clear. I'm a marine biologist, someone who studies the ocean and coastal ecosystems for a living. My wooden house isn't fancy. The roof tiles have faded with the years, but every piece of wood is soaked with the salt air and sunshine of Hawaii. I chose to live here not just because I love nature, but because my research on coral reefs and marine life requires it. My life is simple, but meaningful. The house has weathered hurricanes, tropical storms, and countless high tides for 3 decades. It's built the traditional Hawaiian way with deep foundation pilings that go down 20 feet into bedrock flexible wooden frame that bends with the wind and natural materials that breathe with the ocean's rhythm. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting to that letter, but something about the tone made my skin crawl. The corporate language felt foreign and threatening in this peaceful place I'd called home for so long. 2 days later, a convoy of luxury cars appeared like something out of a mob movie. From the first Mercedes, Olivia Williams stepped out of the luxury car, exuding the kind of power that only money and influence can buy. But what impressed me wasn't her appearance, it was the way she looked at me. Those eyes weren't just contemptuous, they were calculating, like she was appraising merchandise that needed to be liquidated. I wasn't sure if I should be insulted or worried, maybe both. The woman had this cold, predatory energy that made me think of a shark circling wounded prey. Her entire demeanor screamed entitlement, as if she'd never been told no in her life. I could already tell this conversation wouldn't go well for either of us. "You must be James," Olivia said, not waiting for my response. Her voice had that artificial sweetness that rich people use when they're about to screw you over. "I'm Olivia Williams, president of HOA Seashore Estates. We have big plans for this area." She swept her gaze over my wooden house like she was looking at garbage that needed cleaning up. "This house doesn't fit our vision, but don't worry, we'll help you find a new place to live." Did she really just say that out loud? I actually had to stop and stare at her after that one. The audacity was breathtaking. This woman was standing on my property telling me my home didn't meet her standards and offering to help me move like she was doing me a favor. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes remained ice cold throughout the entire exchange. Olivia's voice was all business. "We're building an exclusive resort here. No room for your old house." I felt my heart pounding as she pointed to the beach in front of my house with manicured fingers that had probably never touched sand. "That area will become a private beach for residents only. No more public access, no more noise from tourists and locals. Just peace and privacy for people who can afford quality." I wish I could tell you, I kept my cool. But come on, who wouldn't snap at hearing their lifelong home described like a business acquisition? The woman was talking about erasing everything I'd built my life around, and she seemed genuinely excited about it. Her enthusiasm for destroying my world was perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire encounter. Behind Olivia, men in expensive suits were taking photos of my property, measuring distances, and making notes on clipboards. One guy was even testing the soil with some kind of electronic device. They weren't just visiting, they were surveying, planning, plotting. It felt like an invasion, and I realized this wasn't just about HOA rules. This was about money power, and the kind of people who think everything in the world is for sale if you have enough cash. Maybe I should have called the police right then, but I was too shocked to think clearly. The systematic way they documented my home felt like vultures picking over a carcass. They'd clearly done this before to other unsuspecting homeowners. 30 days, Olivia said coldly, the words final as she turned away. Cooperate or leave, your choice. Her words hit me like a slap, making my chest tighten with frustration. War had just been declared, and I was apparently the enemy in my own home. Looking back, I still can't believe she had the nerve to give me an ultimatum on property I'd owned for decades. But as I watched her convoy disappear down the coastal road, I realized something important. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for the ocean itself. The arrogance of her ultimatum told me everything I needed to know about what I was up against. This wasn't going to be a fair fight. I watched the convoy disappear down the road, the letter crumpled in my hand, my knuckles stiff from gripping it too tightly. 30 years of marine ecosystem research had taught me one thing. When an environment is threatened, you have to fight to protect it. I wasn't sure what I was up against yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about everything this place represented, everything I'd worked to understand and preserve. The ocean had been my laboratory, my sanctuary, my life's work. Now it was time to defend it. But as Olivia's convoy vanished, I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was war. And unlike her, I actually understood what I was fighting for. The HOA started construction the very next week. And I mean, they went all out like they were building a military base. Every day the sound of machinery roared from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m. I felt like I was living in a war zone. The drilling, hammering, and truck engines made it impossible to concentrate on my research work. I'm not even sure why they had to start so aggressively, but it felt deliberate, like they wanted to make my life miserable from day one. It didn't make sense at the time, but looking back, psychological warfare was probably exactly what it was. They wanted me broken and desperate before they made their final buyout offer. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental, starting exactly when most people would be trying to sleep or work. The harassment tactics started small, but escalated quickly in ways that were clearly designed to drive me crazy. Construction trucks blocked my driveway every single morning, forcing me to walk half a mile to get to my car. When I complained, the foreman just shrugged and said they needed the space for equipment staging. Construction waste was dumped right next to my property line, creating foul smells that attracted flies and rats. Portable toilets were positioned, so the stench would blow directly toward my house when the trade winds picked up. The noise was constant and deliberate, with jackhammers starting at exactly 5 a.m. and stopping at exactly 10 p.m. every single day. Maybe I should have just walked away at that point. I don't know. But something about giving in to bullies has always rubbed me the wrong way, especially when they're trying to steal something that doesn't belong to them. Each new violation was more absurd than the last, coming daily, like clockwork. My yard was too messy because I had research equipment and specimen containers visible from the street. My house paint was not matching community standards, even though there were no community standards when I built the damn thing 30 years ago. Even my mailbox was improperly positioned, according to some newly invented regulation that apparently applied retroactively to properties that predated the HOA. Each violation came with fines ranging from $25 to $150. I knew this was legal harassment, but technically they had the right to enforce these rules under HOA covenants. Seriously, did she really think nickel and diming me was going to work? I wasn't sure if I should be angry or impressed by the systematic pettiness of it all. The sheer creativity of their violations was almost artistic in its maliciousness. Instead of panicking, I decided to fight back with what I knew best evidence. I documented everything with scientific precision that would make peer reviewers proud. I photographed construction activities with timestamps and GPS coordinates, measured distances to property lines with surveyor-grade equipment, recorded noise levels with a calibrated sound meter, and tracked truck movements with detailed logs that included license plates, company names, and violation patterns. My marine biology training had taught me the importance of accurate data collection and systematic observation. Looking back, I should have known that methodical approach would pay off eventually. Though at the time I felt like I was just trying to stay sane while documenting my own systematic torture. Every scientist knows that good data can make or break any argument, and I was building the mother of all cases. When I reviewed the construction site with a professional eye, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Using my knowledge of coastal ecosystems and 20 years of studying this exact shoreline, I realized a large portion of the HOA construction sat directly in a protected coastal buffer zone. Federal regulations strictly prohibit major construction in these areas without special environmental permits that take years to obtain and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in environmental impact studies. That can't be right, can it? But as I double-checked my measurements against official maps from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the reality became undeniable. They were building illegally in protected marine habitat, and they either didn't know or didn't care about federal environmental law. Either way, their ignorance or arrogance had just handed me the weapon I needed to fight back. I spent evenings researching environmental laws and reviewing public permits with the obsessive focus that usually goes into my coral research. Using GPS coordinates and comparing them with official coastal protection maps, I confirmed my suspicions and discovered something even worse. The HOA was building without proper environmental clearance in sensitive marine habitat that was home to endangered Hawaiian monk seals and protected sea turtle nesting sites. I wasn't sure if this was incompetence or arrogance, but either way, it was exactly the kind of violation that could shut down their entire operation and result in criminal charges. Maybe I was being too optimistic, but for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had a real weapon instead of just complaints about noise and dust. The federal government doesn't mess around when it comes to protected species and their habitats. I systematically photographed construction boundaries with the same precision I use for documenting coral bleaching events, documented exact distances to the high tide line using professional surveying equipment, and collected water samples from disturbed areas to test for construction, runoff contamination. My scientific training proved invaluable because I knew exactly what evidence regulatory agencies would need to build a bulletproof case. The water samples showed elevated levels of concrete particulates, diesel fuel contamination, and sediment disruption that was killing marine microorganisms essential to the coastal food chain. This wasn't just illegal construction, it was environmental destruction on a massive scale. Every sample I collected was another nail in Olivia's coffin, and I was just getting started. Sitting in my home office, surrounded by photos, measurements, water analysis results, and legal documents, I smiled for the first time since Olivia appeared on my doorstep. I may not have had their money or their lawyers, but I had something they didn't have: knowledge, truth, and evidence that could destroy their entire project. The ocean had been my laboratory for 30 years, and now it was time to use that expertise as a weapon. Olivia Williams was about to learn that you don't mess with a marine biologist's ecosystem without consequences. I knew this was more than petty bureaucracy. Olivia was playing a long game, and I was its first target. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who actually understood the rules she was breaking. I filed an anonymous complaint with the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, the EPA Regional Office, and the County Environmental Division the next morning. I included comprehensive documentation that read like a PhD dissertation, photographs with GPS coordinates and timestamps, water quality analysis showing contamination levels, detailed violations of coastal protection statutes with specific regulatory citations, and technical analysis of environmental impact that would make any government scientist sit up and take notice. Looking back, I probably should have expected the retaliation that followed. But honestly, I was too focused on the satisfaction of finally fighting back with real ammunition to think about consequences. Sometimes when you're a scientist, you forget that not everyone plays by the rules of evidence and logic. I'd spent so much time in the academic world that I forgot how dirty real-world fights could get. 3 days later, an environmental inspector arrived unannounced in an official government vehicle with federal plates. Construction stopped immediately pending investigation, and I watched from my porch as the inspector examined the site with professional measuring tools, taking photos that matched my documentation and clearly finding multiple violations. It didn't make sense at the time why I felt so vindicated, but seeing those construction crews standing around doing nothing while an official documented their illegal work was absolutely beautiful. The inspector spent 4 hours on site, took water samples, measured distances to protected habitats, and made notes that filled an entire clipboard. Maybe I was being petty, but after weeks of harassment, a little petty felt pretty good. Watching Olivia's carefully orchestrated construction schedule grind to a complete halt was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. Olivia stormed to my house that afternoon, her face red with rage and her perfect hair disheveled for the first time since I'd met her. "You did this," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of professional courtesy. "You filed that complaint." Her composed business facade had completely shattered, revealing the entitled brat underneath the expensive suit. "Do you have any idea how much money you just cost us? We have investors, deadlines, contracts." Seriously, did she really think screaming at me was going to help her case? I actually had to bite back a laugh, watching this supposedly professional woman lose her mind on my front porch like a toddler having a tantrum. The mask had finally slipped, and I was seeing the real Olivia Williams for the first time. It wasn't a pretty sight. "I just ensured laws are followed," I replied as calmly as I could manage, though inside I was enjoying every second of her meltdown. "Maybe you should have checked environmental regulations before building in protected marine habitat." Olivia's eyes narrowed dangerously, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to hit me. "You have no idea who you're messing with. This is war now," she hissed through clenched teeth. I wish I could tell you her threats intimidated me, but honestly, watching someone that powerful lose control was more satisfying than scary. Though looking back, I probably should have taken those threats more seriously. Rich people with wounded egos can be incredibly dangerous. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know about how much damage my complaint had already caused. During my legal research into HOA procedures, I discovered something that made me realize Olivia's operation was far shadier than simple environmental violations. She was involved in a complex land transfer scheme using multiple shell companies to hide actual ownership, avoiding disclosure requirements, and potentially evading millions in taxes. The web of ownership deliberately obscured who really controlled the development, with companies registered in Delaware and Nevada that existed only on paper. I wasn't sure if this was standard rich person tax avoidance or actual fraud, but it definitely felt shady enough to interest federal investigators. The more I dug into public records, the more convinced I became that this woman had been getting away with questionable practices for years. Every document I found raised more questions than it answered, painting a picture of systematic deception. Instead of just anger, Olivia made a calculated move that hit me where it hurt most and showed her true vindictive nature. She ordered crews to cut down my cherished coconut palms, magnificent trees that had survived hurricanes for decades and served as home to dozens of bird species I'd been studying. "Safety hazard," she claimed when I confronted the work crew, "blocking sightlines for our residents and potential liability issues." Watching those beautiful giants fall, each one crashing to the ground with a sound like thunder, I felt rage but channeled it into determination. Those palms had been like old friends, witnesses to 30 years of my life by the ocean, and their rings told stories of every storm and drought this coastline had endured. I'm not even sure why their destruction affected me so deeply, but it felt like she was erasing my history, my connection to this place, everything that made this spot home. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The psychological warfare escalated when workers poured concrete over a section of public beach that had been used by local families for generations, posting private property, no trespassing signs that had no legal authority whatsoever. This wasn't just about blocking beach access, it was a personal attack designed to break my spirit and show the community that Olivia Williams could do whatever she wanted. Children who had played on that sand for years were now being turned away by security guards. But instead of an emotional outburst that would make me look unstable, I calmly documented everything with my camera, taking photos of crews, license plates, exact locations of violations, and even recording conversations with the security guards who clearly had no idea what they were legally allowed to enforce. Maybe I should have confronted them directly, but my scientific training kicked in. Evidence first, emotions later. Every illegal action she took was another piece of evidence I could use against her. That evening, I filed a second anonymous complaint about destruction of public beach access and illegal privatization of public lands, this time including photos of families being turned away from beaches their grandparents had used. I also tipped off local environmental groups about the palm tree destruction and provided contact information for the Hawaiian Audubon Society, who were very interested in the habitat destruction. 2 days later, county officials arrived with a court order demanding immediate removal of all concrete from the public beach and restoration of public access. Olivia stood among silent construction equipment, talking frantically on her phone with lawyers, who were clearly telling her she'd overplayed her hand. For the first time, she looked scared instead of arrogant, and I could see her realizing that her money and connections might not be enough to bulldoze through federal environmental law. The The sound of concrete being jackhammered away was like a symphony to my ears. The sound of concrete being jackhammered away from the public beach was music to my ears, but I knew this was just the beginning of our war. Olivia had started this fight thinking she could intimidate one lone scientist with bureaucratic harassment and psychological warfare, but she'd picked a fight with the wrong marine biologist. As I watched her empire of luxury homes slowly grinding to a halt under federal investigation, I realized I was about to discover just how far a desperate, wealthy, powerful woman would go to protect her investment. That letter was just the first shot. I didn't know it yet, but this war was about to get ugly. What I didn't realize was that Olivia's next move would be so vicious, so personal, that it would change everything between us forever. Unable to find a legal way to stop me, Olivia hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my personal life, and, they went full stalker mode. When that failed to turn up anything more scandalous than overdue library books and a tendency to buy too much coffee, she planted false evidence and spread rumors about my mental health through the HOA newsletter. Anonymous letters started circulating, claiming I was unstable and harassing neighbors, with detailed descriptions of supposedly erratic behavior that sounded like they were written by someone who'd never actually met me. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered that she considered me such a threat, or worried about how far she was willing to go to destroy my reputation. I felt like I was being cornered, and something inside me was screaming to fight back, but I couldn't yet see how. The systematic nature of the attack told me this wasn't amateur hour anymore. The harassment got serious when police arrived at my door, investigating fabricated complaints that could have resulted in real legal trouble. I was questioned about alleged stalking and property damage, all complete lies backed up by doctored photos and witness statements from people I had never even spoken to. Some HOA residents started viewing me with suspicion, whispering whenever I passed by on the beach and crossing the street to avoid me like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. For the first time, I felt truly alone in this fight. Fighting a powerful organization with unlimited resources while being painted as an unstable troublemaker wasn't exactly how I'd planned to spend my middle age. Maybe I should have just taken their buyout offer and left for some quiet research station in Alaska. I don't know. But running away from bullies has never been my style, especially when they're using tactics this dirty and underhanded. There were moments of real doubt during those dark weeks when the isolation was getting to me more than I wanted to admit. Was I being paranoid? Was I too stubborn for my own good? Had I lost perspective on what was really important? The psychological pressure was intense, designed to make me question my own sanity and judgment. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if I was the crazy one, if maybe Olivia was right, and I should just take the money and disappear. But just when I was about to give up and call a real estate agent, my old college roommate Mark Anderson called, out of the blue. He was now an environmental lawyer specializing in corporate fraud cases based in Honolulu, with a practice that focused on taking down exactly the kind of people who were making my life hell. James, I heard about your situation with Olivia Williams through legal networks. We need to talk. I'm not even sure why hearing his voice made me feel so relieved, but suddenly I didn't feel quite so alone anymore. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Mark arrived the next day with a briefcase full of documents and the kind of determined expression I remembered from college when he was about to demolish someone in a debate. He'd changed from the carefree college student I remembered into a sharp, determined lawyer with expensive suits and the confidence that comes from winning cases against powerful opponents. "I've been following the Williams family for years," he said grimly as he spread documents across my kitchen table. "This isn't just about your case, James. This is much bigger than one HOA development. That can't be right, can it? But as Mark showed me newspaper clippings, court records, and financial documents, I realized this was bigger than just my little beach house. Way bigger and way more personal than I'd ever imagined. The scope of what he was showing me made my head spin with possibilities. James Olivia's father, Thomas Williams, destroyed my family's construction business 15 years ago. Mark revealed, his voice tight with controlled anger. He used insider information to manipulate municipal contracts, causing our company to lose millions, and dozens of good people lost their jobs because of his corruption. My father never recovered from the bankruptcy and the stress. The shame of losing everything killed him within 2 years. Looking back, I still can't believe the coincidence, but Mark's personal vendetta meant I wasn't just getting a lawyer. I was getting someone with a very personal reason to see the Williams family, destroyed someone who understood exactly what these people were capable of and how they operated. The enemy of my enemy was definitely my friend. His pain was real, and it gave our alliance a depth I hadn't expected. Mark didn't just have personal motivation, he had solid legal evidence that made my environmental complaints look like parking tickets. He showed me documents proving a Williams family pattern of real estate fraud, spanning 2 decades, including bribing officials to approve illegal construction projects, falsifying environmental reports, and using intimidation tactics against anyone who opposed their developments. I've been building a case against them for a decade, he said, pulling out a thick folder labeled Williams Criminal Enterprise. Your situation is just the latest chapter in a very long book of corruption. Armed with this new information and an ally who knew how to fight dirty when necessary, I confronted Olivia directly the next day. Tell me about your father, Thomas Williams, and his conviction for securities fraud in 2003, I said calmly when she showed up for another intimidation session. Her face went pale like she'd seen a ghost. Family business practices seemed to run in the genes. The look of shock and fear in her eyes was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. You want to play dirty? Olivia hissed, but I could hear fear creeping into her voice for the first time. I'll bury you in legal fees. My lawyers will tie you up in court for years until you're bankrupt and broken. But for the first time, I detected real fear behind her threats instead of just arrogance. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but she seemed genuinely rattled by the mention of her father's criminal history and the realization that someone had been investigating her family for years. Mark and I decided to not just clear my name, but launch a full-scale legal assault against the HOA for fraud, environmental violations, racketeering, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This isn't just your fight anymore, Mark said as we shook hands in my kitchen. It's about justice for everyone they've hurt. I was no longer alone. I had a skilled ally with a very personal stake in destroying Olivia's empire, and she was about to learn what happens when you mess with people who have nothing left to lose. But as we prepared our legal counterattack, neither Mark nor I realized that Olivia Beetz was about to make a discovery that would change everything. A discovery that would put hundreds of innocent people in mortal danger and force me to choose between winning our legal battle and potentially saving lives. Because sometimes when you're fighting monsters, you have to decide what you're really willing to sacrifice for victory. I didn't know what I was up against yet, but I was already digging in. This fight was just beginning, and Olivia had no idea what she'd unleashed by bringing Mark Anderson into this war. The HOA hired a top-tier law firm from Los Angeles, the kind of legal sharks who specialize in destroying small opponents through sheer financial exhaustion. They launched countersuits claiming defamation and business interference using every delay tactic in the book to bury us in paperwork and motions that required expensive responses. Legal costs mounted quickly, like water filling a sinking ship, and I was forced to sell some of my research equipment and take on freelance consulting work to pay legal fees that were draining my savings account faster than I could replenish it. There were sleepless nights wondering if I could afford to continue fighting nights when I'd sit on my porch staring at the ocean and questioning everything. Was I being too proud? Too stubborn? Maybe I should have just walked away while I still had some savings left and could start over somewhere else. I don't know. But Mark kept reminding me that backing down now would mean Olivia Williams would destroy this coastline and get away with it forever. The letter wasn't just an ultimatum, it was a challenge, and I wasn't the kind of man to back down. Despite the financial pressure that was making me consider selling my house just to pay lawyers, Mark and I maintained steady progress in building our case. We systematically documented every environmental violation with scientific precision, every fraudulent permit with paper trails that led back to bribes and corruption, every illegal business practice with financial records that showed exactly how the Williams family operated. My scientific background proved invaluable in presenting technical evidence to the court in ways that judges and juries could understand. It didn't make sense at the time why the legal system moved so slowly when environmental destruction was happening in real time, but looking back, that methodical pace worked in our favor. We had time to build an absolutely bulletproof case that would withstand any challenge from expensive corporate lawyers. I refused to panic. Instead, I channeled my frustration into something I could control: data. If they wanted a fight, I would give them proof. Mark, experienced in environmental litigation against powerful opponents, knew the importance of historical research that went deeper than current violations. He spent days at the University of Hawaii archives digging through old geological surveys and disaster reports that most lawyers would never think to examine. I wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly, but his thoroughness reminded me why we'd been such good friends in college. The guy never did anything halfway, whether it was studying for exams or building legal cases that could destroy corrupt corporations. "James, you need to see this immediately," Mark called one afternoon. His voice excited in a way I hadn't heard since we were students. I found a geological survey from 1975 showing this entire area was devastated by a tsunami 50 years ago. The excitement in his voice told me this was the smoking gun we'd been looking for. According to the historical records Mark had unearthed, no permanent structures should be built in the major impact zone, where Olivia's luxury homes were going up like targets in a shooting gallery. The data aligned perfectly with my knowledge of coastal geology and 30 years of studying this exact shoreline. The area showed classic signs of tsunami impact that I should have recognized earlier: unusual sand deposits that didn't match normal beach formation, scattered coral fragments embedded in soil layers far from the current reef line, and unnaturally flat topography that suggested massive wave action had scoured the landscape clean. As a marine biologist who specialized in coastal ecosystems, I should have recognized the signs earlier. Looking back, I'm embarrassed I missed something so obvious, but I'd been so focused on current environmental violations that I'd ignored the geological history beneath my feet. We decided to keep the tsunami information secret for now, using it as our final trump card when Olivia thought she was winning. Instead, we focused current litigation on existing environmental violations to maintain legal pressure while quietly building our nuclear option. Reading those historical accounts of tsunami destruction, detailed reports of waves that reached 60 feet high and traveled 3 miles inland, I began quietly preparing my home for the possibility that history might repeat itself. Not because I expected to lose the lawsuit, but because nature might solve this problem in its own way, and I wanted to be ready. I'm not sure if that was scientific intuition or just paranoia, but something about those old disaster reports made me nervous about the ocean's long-term plans for this coastline. The historical research revealed something even more disturbing than I'd initially realized. The 1975 tsunami hadn't been a freak accident. It was part of a predictable cycle of seismic activity in the Pacific Ring of Fire that occurred roughly every 50 to 75 years. We were right in the window for another major event, and the geological signs were already there for anyone who knew how to read them. Increased seismic activity in the Pacific, unusual tidal patterns that I'd been noticing in my daily observations, and changes in marine animal behavior that my 30 years of research told me were significant warning signs. While Olivia celebrated small legal victories and continued construction on her doomed luxury homes, I stood on my porch studying ocean patterns with new eyes and growing concern. 30 years of marine research had taught me to read the ocean's moods like a fisherman reads weather patterns, and something felt different lately in ways that made my scientific instincts scream warnings. Subtle changes in wave patterns that didn't match seasonal norms, unusual fish behavior with species appearing in the wrong locations at the wrong times, and strange tidal variations that suggested deep ocean currents were shifting in response to seismic pressure. The ocean was trying to tell me something, and for the first time in months, I was starting to listen with the full attention of someone who'd spent his career studying these waters. Maybe I was reading too much into natural variations, but my scientific instincts were screaming that change was coming. Big change that would make our legal battle look like a minor disagreement. As I prepared for the next phase of our legal war, I had no idea that Olivia Williams was about to make a discovery that would reveal the true depths of her family's corruption. A discovery that would force me to choose between winning our court case and potentially saving hundreds of lives. Because sometimes the real enemy isn't the person trying to steal your property. Sometimes the real enemy is someone willing to sacrifice innocent people to protect their investment. And I was about to learn exactly how far Olivia Williams would go to keep her empire of lies from crashing down. Olivia's convoy disappeared, and I realized this wasn't just about my house. It was about something much bigger, something I was ready to destroy. The Tsunami Warning Center issued its usual advisories, but this time they felt different, dangerous. Initial reports suggested minor tsunami risk, the kind of bureaucratic language designed to avoid panic. But as a marine biologist familiar with Pacific geology, I knew this coastline's vulnerability better than anyone, and it was about to strike. The signs I'd been noticing in ocean behavior suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of impending seismic disaster. We weren't just dealing with normal weather patterns. We were looking at the early stages of something much more serious, something that could dwarf our legal battles. Through Mark's investigation and government contacts, we discovered Olivia didn't just know about the tsunami risk, she was actively covering it up, with systematic deception that suggested criminal intent. She had hired a fake geological consultant, a disgraced former professor who'd lost his credentials for falsifying research to write a fraudulent safety report, claiming the area was completely safe from natural disasters. Did she really think she could just lie about geological reality and hope nobody would notice? I actually had to read that report twice because I couldn't believe someone would falsify something so fundamentally dangerous. The woman wasn't just greedy, she was recklessly endangering hundreds of lives to protect her investment, crossing a line from civil litigation into potential manslaughter. Even worse than the fake safety report, Olivia had paid corrupt officials to alter official tsunami hazard maps in HOA disclosure documents shown to potential buyers. Families investing their life savings received falsified information showing minimal risk when the actual hazard level was classified as extreme by every legitimate geological survey. I secretly recorded an HOA meeting where Olivia reassured nervous investors with practiced lies. Tsunami warnings are just media hype designed to hurt property values by environmental extremists. Our homes are built to the highest engineering standards, with foundations that go down to bedrock. These houses will withstand any natural disaster Mother Nature can throw at them. But there she was, lying directly to people who trusted her with their children's future. New homeowners had no idea they were living in a tsunami danger zone that had been classified as uninhabitable by federal geological surveys. Families with young children who'd been told they were investing in the safest community in Hawaii. Olivia's greed had put hundreds of people at risk, and this went far beyond fraud or environmental violations. This was potentially mass manslaughter if anything happened to those families, and I realized I was sitting on information that could save lives but might also destroy our legal case if revealed too early. Maybe I should have gone to the media immediately, but Mark advised building our legal case first while gathering more evidence. The moral weight of keeping quiet about the danger was crushing me daily. Olivia hired a public relations firm to spread disinformation about tsunami risks, launching a sophisticated media campaign claiming I was spreading false panic to hurt property values, and portraying me as an environmental extremist trying to stop legitimate development. She organized an HOA meeting specifically to condemn me as a community saboteur and unstable individual with a personal vendetta against progress. The community completely turned against me after that carefully orchestrated character assassination. Even former supporters now viewed me as a troublemaker, trying to destroy their investments and dreams of oceanfront living. I felt like a lone voice in the wilderness, warning of danger that no one wanted to hear because it threatened everything they had worked for. Instead of arguing publicly and looking like the crazy person Olivia was painting me as, I demonstrated my convictions through actions that spoke louder than any protest. I carefully weatherproofed my home, using traditional Hawaiian methods, moved all valuables to higher floors, secured outdoor furniture with chains and bolts, and stocked emergency supplies including fresh water, medical supplies, and battery-powered communication equipment. My preparations followed traditional Hawaiian methods for tsunami protection, passed down through generations of families who'd survived these disasters before modern warning systems existed. Maybe I was being paranoid, but 30 years of studying the ocean had taught me to respect its power and prepare for the worst-case scenario. I tried one last time to warn the community by posting historical tsunami photos on the community bulletin board, dramatic black and white images showing the devastation from the 1975 disaster. Olivia had them removed within hours, claiming I was terrorizing residents with fake disaster scenarios and threatening to have me arrested for harassment if I continued my fear-mongering campaign. As Olivia's residents continued their parties and house tours showing off their luxury homes to mainland relatives, I stood on my reinforced porch watching the ocean with growing unease. The signs were unmistakable to my trained eye, unusual wave patterns that suggested deep ocean disturbances. Marine animals acting strangely with dolphins and whales, changing their migration patterns, and subtle changes in water color that indicated massive currents shifting far below the surface. As I watched Olivia's empire of luxury homes nearing completion, each one filled with families who had no idea they were living on borrowed time, I realized I was about to witness something that would change everything. Something that would make our legal battles look like children's games and force me to confront the terrible question of whether justice and revenge are worth the price of human lives. Because the ocean was coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't care about property rights, legal battles, or the difference between guilty and innocent. It would only care about reclaiming what had always belonged to it. As I prepared for the next phase, I had no idea Olivia was about to make a discovery that would turn the tables. At 3 a.m. on a night that started like any other, I woke to a sound I'd never heard in 30 years on this coast. A sound that made every instinct in my marine biologist brain scream danger. It was a deep primal roar of the ocean in full fury, not the gentle crash of normal waves, but the angry bellow of billions of tons of water moving with unstoppable force. This wasn't the minor tsunami from the weather reports that everyone had dismissed as media hype. This was nature unleashing decades of stored power, the kind of geological event that reshapes coastlines and rewrites history in a single night. I grabbed my emergency supplies and moved to the highest point in my house, watching through reinforced windows as the impossible became reality. As the water receded after the first massive wave, revealing the devastation like a curtain being pulled back, a horrible truth became visible that made my blood run cold and vindicated every warning I'd tried to give. The HOA hadn't just built illegally in protected habitat, they had strip-mined thousands of tons of sand from the beach itself to use as construction material, leaving massive holes and weakened foundations that were now exposed like open wounds in the earth. Olivia's highest engineering standards had been built on a foundation of stolen sand from the very beach they were supposed to protect, and the 120 luxury homes were essentially built on quicksand that offered no resistance to the tsunami's power. It was like watching dominoes fall, except each domino was worth $2 million and might contain an entire family. From my reinforced home that had been built the traditional Hawaiian way, with deep foundation pilings, I watched in fascinated horror as million-dollar homes collapsed like houses of cards. The poorly constructed foundations built on that weakened sand base instead of proper bedrock offered no resistance to wave action that my simple wooden house weathered like it was designed for exactly this purpose. I saw HOA residents fleeing in panic, some pounding on my door, begging for shelter from the very disaster I'd been trying to warn them about for months. Looking back, I should probably feel guilty about the satisfaction I felt watching 30 years of harassment get washed away in 30 minutes, but honestly, there was something almost therapeutic about seeing natural justice served with such precise efficiency. Through my window, I watched Olivia standing in the ruins of her empire, completely broken and soaked to the skin. Her Mercedes floated away with the debris field of shattered dreams, spinning slowly in the current like expensive driftwood. She fell to her knees among the wreckage, crying like a child who'd lost her favorite toy. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the families she'd deceived, the environmental destruction she'd caused, and the systematic cover-up that had put innocent people in danger. For 30 years, I'd watched this coastline through storms, high tides, and seasonal changes. My humble wooden house, built with traditional Hawaiian construction methods and deep foundation pilings that went down to bedrock, stood firm against the same forces that had obliterated her concrete and steel monuments to greed. As dawn broke over a landscape that had been completely transformed overnight, the scale of destruction became clear in ways that made our legal battles seem insignificant. Every single HOA house was gone, reduced to floating debris that stretched miles into the ocean like a giant's scattered toys. But the worst part wasn't the property damage or the financial losses, it was knowing this tragedy was completely preventable if one woman hadn't decided that profit was more important than human lives. If Olivia had just followed environmental regulations, if she'd respected the ocean instead of trying to conquer it, if she'd listened to historical warnings instead of covering them up with fraudulent reports, those families would still have homes, and the people who didn't make it to higher ground would still be alive. The aftermath moved quickly once federal investigators arrived and began piecing together the full scope of Olivia's criminal enterprise. She now faces criminal charges for fraud document falsification, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to conceal public safety information, charges that carry potential prison sentences measured in decades rather than years. Her remaining assets are being seized for victim compensation, and the woman who once controlled millions is now facing serious prison time while living in a FEMA trailer. All charges against me were dropped when the investigation revealed the full extent of HOA corruption, validating everything Mark and I had fought for, and proving that sometimes the crazy environmentalist is actually the only sane person in the room. With the HOA gone, and Olivia facing criminal prosecution, the beach began its natural recovery process. The surviving residents, initially angry about their lost investments and looking for someone to blame, gradually understood they were lucky to be alive, and that I'd been trying to save their lives rather than destroy their dreams. Some actually thanked me for trying to warn them, though it was too little too late for the families who hadn't made it to safety in time. Hawaii state government asked me to consult on new coastal development regulations, and my experience became a cautionary tale taught in environmental law schools across the country. The fight wasn't just personal anymore. It had helped protect future coastlines from the same kind of reckless development that prioritizes short-term profit over long-term environmental stability and human safety. Mark and I had won more than just a legal battle. We had helped establish precedent that would protect countless other communities from similar predators. Sitting on my porch with morning coffee, watching the beach slowly return to its natural state, I can't help but feel a deep sense of peace. It's not about winning or losing a legal battle, and definitely not about revenge. It's that quiet satisfaction that comes when balance is finally restored, when nature does what it was always meant to do. Olivia's empire, gone like it was never there. The ocean, though, remains eternal. It doesn't follow human laws or care about money. Sometimes justice comes from forces far bigger than we can imagine, forces that don't care about property rights or portfolios. Maybe the real lesson here is, you can't cheat nature. You can't own what belongs to everyone, and when you try, it always catches up. If you're still with me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this crazy ride. Drop a comment, hit like, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to QA Stories for more wild tales like this one. And if you wanted to support the channel, just hit that thanks button below. We'll catch up with you in the next one.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.